Hey guys, Brian here. Today I'm going to break down why I choose to race in flat pedals versus clips. It's one of the oldest debates in mountain biking, but I want to give my perspective on it and maybe share a few things to help you guys decide what's best for your riding and racing. So let's get into it. So this topic has been torn apart a million times, but for me, I think the most important thing is finding the setup that you're most comfortable on. I think the performance difference between flats and clips is often overstated. I think there is something there and they allow you to ride the bike in different ways. But what really makes the most difference, in my opinion, is what you're most confident on, and that's going to outweigh any of the performance differences or gains or losses from each setup. So I'm going to break down what I think the benefits and drawbacks to each one is and how I've arrived on racing flats and riding flats full time at this point. So for me, I've gone back and forth from clips to flats throughout my entire riding and racing career. I started on flats when I got more serious into racing. I switched to clips, and then it seemed like almost every off season, as soon as the racing was done, I would put on the flats, be loving the flats, and then a month or two before race season, I would force myself to get into my clips and then have to learn and set up my clips for racing. And then it was just kind of always a little bit of a seesaw, and I was really conflicted coming into this season because I just really was feeling good on my flats and I hated going back to my clip pedals. And I think for me it became more of a mental battle, and it sounds a bit stupid to have a mental battle over your pedals, but for me, dropping into race runs, I just always felt like there was a thing in the back of my head that told me, oh, I can't ride as loose or as hard as I want to because I'm not sure if I can clip out or get my foot back in. Like, it was just never as dialed as I wanted it. And I think if you don't have that thought in your head, you should absolutely go ahead and ride clip pedals, race them. But for me, I think it was more of a mental thing than it was anything else, just having that thought in the back of my head that kind of made me second guess my every move on the bike. I don't know, I don't want to say it was my every move, but it just had me second guessing a lot of things. And it was just one thing in my head that I could eliminate when going into race runs and a race weekend, is just not thinking about setting up my pedals, if I have them dialed, if they're worn out or not, and just like really focus on riding the bike. And for me, that just always felt more comfortable in flats. A lot of people say that in racing, you shouldn't really be taking your foot out. And that's kind of why you should be riding clips anyways, because you just shouldn't really be having to take your foot out and being worried about getting it back in. But for me, with flats, it's almost counterintuitive to the way most people think about it. I feel more confident to keep my feet up on flats, and I feel like I ride with my feet up more on flat pedals. And that's because I just feel way more confident to save myself or put my foot out in an emergency, like if anything weird happens, and that just gives me the confidence to commit to the corner or the section with my feet on the pedals. Whereas with clips, I feel like I'm unclipping in a corner preemptively because I just don't have that confidence that I can recover from a front tire push or jackknifing in a corner and getting my foot out to save it reliably. And that's just part of like that mental confidence going into a race run, feeling like I just don't have to worry about that. And that's really what makes the biggest difference for me. And no matter what you ride, I do think it's good to commit to corners with both feet on the pedals, like 9 times out of 10. But for me, I can actually do that more with flats rather than on clips. So whatever can allow you to go into a corner confident. A lot of people don't have an issue just unclipping with their clips, but for me, it was just always a little dicey, and that's a big part of why I chose to race on flats. And I think a big part of it as well is the bike you're riding. In my experience, there's a huge difference in how different bikes ride with flat pedals. Some are much easier to ride, some are an absolute pain in the ass, and it can really guide your decision on what is best for you. So this season, racing the Forbidden Dreadnought, it's a high pivot bike. One of the key performance differences with this high pivot design is that it's a massive decrease in pedal kick. That idler pulley just isolates those forces so you're not feeling them in your feet, and it makes a huge difference with how easy the bike is to ride. you really get hardly any feedback from that like harsh pedal kick, and I wasn't finding I was blowing my feet off in rough stuff. And that seems to be the biggest problem with running flats, especially racing, is committing to those rough sections and just knowing that your feet are going to stay on the pedals. Sometimes, depending on the bike you're on, it's a little dicey. So having the confidence that this platform is really forgiving to ride on flat pedals really gave me the confidence to run flats full time. And listening to my other friends and stuff, I was convinced halfway through the season to kind of try some Crank Brothers, because I'd never tried those before, but it still had just me feeling a little tied up in the bike and not completely confident in my setup. I think if you do choose clips to race in, it's something that you have to be super, super dialed on. I think for me, it was always hard to get the confidence in my setup to know 100% of the time I'm gonna be back in right when I need to be. And I think dialing in your shoe setup, your pin heights, your cleat position is super crucial, and it's something that I would recommend spending a lot of time on, because for me it was always super hard to get right, and when I did get it right, it made a big difference in how confident I was going racing. But regardless of how dialed my clips were, I think I was always just like a little uncomfortable. And I think especially for enduro racing, it's almost favors flats a little more, in my opinion. It might seem like clips will give you like more pedal power and like snapping out of corners and stuff, but I think in enduro racing, it's such a endurance event. I don't think a lot of people think of it that way, but a lot of these races, you have 30 to 45 minutes of actual race time, and there's going to be a lot of mistakes over that time, and really what has you perform is being consistent, comfortable, being able to minimize mistakes. And for me, riding flats, it's much easier to manage the bike in a lot of situations where you don't know exactly what's going to happen. You don't know the tracks 100%. You can't commit to the lines 100% perfectly all the time. You're going to be making mistakes. The feet are going to come off at some point. And for me, it's much easier to ride looser, recover from mistakes, and just mentally focus on the next section. Because the worst thing in a race run for me is taking my foot out, getting sketchy, and then riding unclipped for a section, struggling to get my foot back in. It's like, I absolutely hate it. And when that happens, the only thing I can think about is like getting my foot into the pedal, and it really screws me up for the entire race run. And on flats, it's just natural for me, even if my foot's not in the right place, just to keep it wide open, focus ahead, make a few adjustments, and just keep on trucking to the finish line. And I really don't think there's a huge difference in the amount of power you can put down, and it's really a give and take. And for me, being just more comfortable and natural on flat pedals, I think it gives a lot more to my riding and makes me a lot more confident and comfortable in my setup. So that's my 2 cents on that debate, at least for enduro racing. I think for downhill, there is a stronger argument for clips, because you should be knowing like exactly where your tires are going to go in every section, and you really shouldn't be clipping out in a downhill race run. And I think being locked in at those speeds, like hitting the roughest stuff like as fast as you can go, I think there's a stronger argument for clips in that situation. But I guess if I'm listening to my own advice, you know, other people have done it on flats, and I'm sure someone could come along and do the same. But I think especially with the speeds these guys are hitting now, if you're trying to race at an elite level, like clips do have a bit of an advantage for downhill. But if you're showing up to a local race, it really comes down to what you're most comfortable in. I do have experience with a wide range of flat pedals, a lot of shoes, and I am pretty picky on my setup, and I've arrived on something that works really well. I've got a few options here from Bergtech, Nuke Proof, and PNW components. So in the next video, I'm gonna break down what I like about each of these pedals, what I choose to run when I'm racing. Maybe there's another option that's better if I'm just riding jumps, but flat pedals are just like a really cool thing to nerd out on, because it's all down to feel, performance. There's not one correct answer. They're all good at different things. I think that's about it for this video. just ride what you want, do what you feel comfortable with. And if you haven't tried flats yet, give it a go, because yeah, it's a really different riding experience if all you've known is clips, and you can only get away with so much on flat pedals. It really forces you to do a lot of things on the bike correctly. It's much harder to bunny hop or jump with an incorrect technique on flats, and it almost forces you to ride the bike in an effective way, like dropping your heels in rough sections, weighting the bike correctly, and it can just allow your riding to grow a lot if you don't have experience riding flats. So I would absolutely recommend it. Keep that foot out in the corners. If it feels sweet, keep it on if it doesn't. But either way, I'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching.